Start recording. Okay. Hello and welcome. We're so happy to have our Goodreads this month with Rich Chiappone, author of the recently released novel Hunger of Crows. Rich is an accomplished author whose work has crossed many mediums like the BBC radio show The Verb and his short story Raccoon, which was made into a short film that was featured in international film festivals. In addition to his work as an author, he also served as editor of the Alaska Quarterly Review and taught at UAA and Kenai Peninsula College. Without further ado, here is Rich.
Hi, everybody. Boy, thanks a lot for reading my book. That's really exciting to know there are people out there, readers, who have had a chance to read it. That's great. It's my first novel. I've written three collections of short stories or essays before that. So it was a new form for me, writing a novel, a book-length story like that. And it took a long time because I didn't know what I was doing. It started out as a short story. In one of my books, you'll find a short story called Personal Use. And in it, there's a woman named Carla who is on the Homer Spit and goes dip netting, for salmon with her friends and the little girls. And there's a guy named Scott Crockett who has a boat, and he's kind of a lonely guy, divorced and feeling sorry for himself. And he's sitting out there on his boat at night. And this, and in the short story version, he just ends up there alone at night, and Carla apparently sinks the boat. So they never meet in the short story. And that was written in around 2010, maybe about 10, 12 years ago. I always felt incomplete, that there was more to the story than that. And so somewhere in between then and now, I started writing, well, what would happen next? And I thought I got to bring them together somehow. So I put Carla into a immersion suit, a survival suit, and had her float into the bay where Scott is sitting anchored up, feeling sorry for himself. It's kind of every man's fantasy that a divorced cocktail waitress will float into his life like that. You know? I usually, in a public reading, I ask for a show of hands of how many men have had that fantasy. And of course, nobody raises their hand, the liars. So anyway, I do appreciate that. As I say, I'm really a short story writer at heart. And it's what I started out writing, and that's what I really like to do. But I am writing another novel set in Homer, and I hope that it will get out there and you guys will have a chance to see that, and sometime in the next 10 years, maybe. I'm pretty slow, so, not very quick. I wonder if you want to, Leslie, shall we ask for questions or to discuss stuff for a while, or what do you want me to do? Read?
Yeah, so Rich is gonna read one of his short stories for us, but he also wants to answer any questions you guys might have. So would you prefer he read first and we do questions after, or do you guys want to ask your questions now?
I'd rather he read.
Okay.
Okay.
I'd rather he read too.
All right. Let's see. Do I need to dim the screen, Leslie?
No, I think it looks good.
Okay. All right. I have a collection of 12 short stories that I'm hoping will be published sometime soon, before my next novel, that's for sure. These are stories that are all set in Alaska. There are set in all different places. Anchorage, Bush, Alaska, Dutch Harbor, and some on the Kenai Peninsula. This one is set in kind of an anchor point. It doesn't, I don't know if it says that in here or not, but yeah, I guess maybe it will. And this is a story based on some things that I saw. My wife and I built a house on the Anchor River, at Anchor Point, over a long period of time. We bought the land in the mid-'80s and then built a cabin on it around 1989, and then started adding on to the cabin. And I don't know when we got water and septic and all that, but over the next 20 years or so, it turned into a house. and we lived there for a while. And then before we moved into Homer. So I have spent a lot of time at Anchor Point. But this is loosely based on some stuff that goes on down there in it that I'd seen. And this is called the Chekhov's Rule. Well, Anton Chekhov was a Russian and a writer who I always admired. And he said he was a playwright. He's most famous for his plays. And Chekhov said one time, rather famously, that if there's a gun in the first act of a play, the gun has to go off in the final act. So this story is called Chekhov's Rule. When I first met Walker 2 years ago, he had a job at the tackle shop on the river, a driver's license, and a classic early 70s Chevy Nova, competition orange. He still had all his teeth. Now the job, the car, and half his teeth are gone, and he's on disability, like 2/3 of the people around here. Half his teeth, 2/3 of the people. Something about this place makes me think in fractions. Nothing feels whole anymore. Don't ask me what Walker's so-called disability is. The inability to chew solid foods or the inability to hold a job. I don't mean to sound harsh. My wife, Janine, says I am not a generous person, but every life has its ups and downs. Around here, the highs seem to happen early and die quickly. And if they ever come back again, it's in a bottle, a needle, or a pipe. It was Janine's idea to move here. When she saw the job opening at the hospital in the town on the bay, she squealed, Alaska. The romance of the far north had her by the heartstrings and set her house hunting. She would have gone for a yurt in the middle of a swamp if I hadn't insisted on 4 solid walls and running water. We've been here 2 years now, and she's more at home every day. Me? I can feel the hunger out there. This place is getting ready to eat us. But back to Walker. This morning I was driving to the post office to pick up our mail when I saw him down in the ditch alongside the road, wading through knee-deep snow, mouth frozen in that toothless pink smile of his, eyes all over the place. He was wearing a long dark coat and, although it was January and maybe 20 degrees and snowing again, no hat. The Burro snowplows had left berms like mountain ranges along both shoulders of the road, and I guess he didn't want to take his chances walking out there in the middle, which is reptile curvy and barely wide enough for 2 cars. Walker is off a couple notches for sure, but not stupid. Trust me, crazy and stupid are sometimes 2 entirely different things. I wondered why he wasn't driving the 4-wheeler that had replaced his Chevy. With fresh snow on black ice, I was driving slowly. Over the top of the berm, I recognized his curly black hair, plastered with flakes, his silver sideburns, those 2-toned eyebrows of his. The premature gray makes it hard to tell how old he is. Late 30s, I'd guess, if I had to. Yet in spite of that and the missing teeth, it's amazing how handsome Walker remains. Picture a young Mel Gibson, only crazier. Since Janine and I moved here, I've tried to stay friendly with the locals. It's cheap insurance, so I honked my horn. Walker kept on walking as if he hadn't heard, smiling like he loved post-holing through wet snow up to his zipper. Without turning my way, he waved one hand high overhead and something big and shiny in his grip. I was already past him when I realized it was an enormous pistol. Maybe I should have turned around and gone back, offered him a lift, tried to stop him from whatever mayhem he intended with that gun. But I can't fix what's wrong with these people, I told myself. Plus, it's all perfectly legal. Sanity is not a requirement for gun ownership in this state, or any other as far as I know. I kept driving. It was the first time I'd seen him in months. Frankly, I'd been hoping he had moved. I didn't care where he went or why. The last time I talked to him was back in October, when he showed up at our house looking for one of his wayward, semi-feral cats. He has 6 or 8 of the things living with him in a little shack cobbled onto a derelict travel trailer. The place is set back 50 yards off the road on a 2-track through the alders. A wood stove for heat, no running water. The property is owned by a very old woman, Mrs. Grackley, who lives nearby in another shack, almost as rough. They're 2 miles from us by the winding road, a lot closer if you cut directly through the woods to our house. Walker is supposed to take care of the old gal as a way of paying rent. People around here have all kinds of deals like that going, anything to avoid real work. My wife Janine was Mrs. Grackley's nurse at the hospital for a while last summer. That's how she met the old woman. Now Janine brings her food and makes sure she has firewood and water. Never mind that Walker is supposed to be doing that. That's my wife all over, helping people in need and enabling those who pretend to be. It was a warm fall evening when Walker came looking for his cat. The birch trees are gone bright yellow, the sky all pink behind the dead volcanoes across the bay. The kind of night that could almost make a person love this place. Walker pulled up in the driveway on his four-wheeler, of course. You're not supposed to drive on state roads, but if the police enforced that law, half the people in this part of the peninsula would starve to death in their own homes. Janine and I were eating dinner. We went out on the porch to see what he wanted. She was always trying to help him with his cats. She wasn't aware that I knew that she bought bags of kibble and dropped them off at his place, and sometimes food for him too, as if he were a hungry animal or an old sick person like Mrs. Grackley. Lost animals, lost souls. Janine can't resist providing what she thinks people need. More than once I've had to convince myself that what she feels for me is love, not pity. That's a hell of a distinction for a man to have to make. Hi, Walker, Janine said to him. Who'd you lose now? Gray guy? Paddlefoot? How could she remember the names of someone else's pets? That's beyond me. If we had children, I would need them to wear name tags. Where's your Nova? I asked him before this turned into a whole conversation about cats. Gone, he said, still sitting on the idling four-wheeler. Geez, if I knew you were going to sell it. But then his cat, whatever its name was, an orange long hair with the tail the size of a push broom, squirmed out from under our porch, ran over and jumped up into Walker's lap. He hugged the animal so hard I thought its eyes would pop out. Janine leaned over the railing. How are you, Walker? How are you doing? Walker rubbed his black and white mustache against the top of the cat's head and kind of shrugged, his eyes darting my way for a second. I thought he looked like he wanted to answer that question, but not with me there on the porch next to her. Dinner's getting cold, I said, and I went back inside and repositioned my chair so I could see the porch from the table. Janine stayed right there. I ate my cold dinner, wondering what happened to that classic Chevy, watching them talk. But back to Walker in the ditch by the side of the road. He was slouching forward in the snowdrifts like a Neanderthal hunter, waving that big handgun around. Not a hunting rifle or a shotgun, a pistol. First of all, nobody hunts in the middle of winter. And secondly, there's only one kind of animal anybody hunts with a pistol at any time of year. A while back, it occurred to me that I was probably the only man in Alaska who didn't own a firearm. I'll admit that I was a little proud of that. It was a matter of principle, something that set me apart from the others around here. But it was beginning to seem simply unwise. Now, I'm just like everyone else, a true local. Except so far, I haven't yet felt the urge to join in the widespread shooting of road signs or rusting snowmobiles, a kind of a tradition around here. Anyway, I picked up our mail and drove back home through the falling snow, wondering if I would find him still slogging through the drifts in the ditch, carrying that gun. But he was nowhere around when I made the turn off the pavement onto our snowed-over side road. He could have cut through the woods anywhere, depending on where he was going with that pistol. God, did I even want to know? When I got home, I turned on the local public station for the news, waiting to hear who'd been shot around here that day. It happens more often than you think for a town this small. Janine was working at the hospital 15 miles away, wouldn't be home until 5 or so. It was snowing harder and the driveway needed clearing. I should have been out running the snowblower, but I stayed inside and paced the house the rest of the day, letting the snow accumulate, thinking about him out there somewhere armed with a pistol the size of a rocket launcher. He had no reason to do me harm, I told myself several times. At 5, I put out some snacks for Janine. It's a ritual we have. I work at home. I'm translating a book by a Russian poet nobody's ever heard of. And out here in the woods, there isn't anyone to talk to all day. Honestly, I don't see myself making lots of friends here anytime soon. So it's kind of a big deal for me when Janine comes home from work. I like to have something ready to munch on. I like to fix her a drink. I cut up some hard salami and then put out some olives, some chunks of smoked salmon on a plate and started watching the clock. By 5:30, I had called her twice. It went straight to message. Her phone was off. Why would she turn her phone off if she was done working her shift? Outside, the forest around the house was going dark. There was no wind, and the falling snowflakes filtered down in slow motion through the dense shadows of the alder thickets. It got darker and darker. I tried Janine's phone again. Nothing. I switched the pork light on and poured myself a Jameson's and sat at the table by the window, watching the untouched driveway, like I could make her appear there by staring at it. All the stories she brought home from the emergency room started unspooling in my brain. The crazy bastard who took a bullet in the stomach when his wife asked him to shoot a pair of handcuffs off his wrists. The 6-year-old boy whose stepfather burned his hair off with a hillbilly flamethrower made from a spray can of engine starter and a Bic lighter. Some drug dealer with one eye shot out by a bow and arrow of all things. The shit these people do to each other here amazes me. One of the older nurses told Janine, "Oh, it used to be a lot worse back in the meth days. With everyone on heroin now, they're more likely to kill themselves than anybody else." Try to take some comfort from that. At 6 o'clock, it was fully dark and I was really getting twitchy, thinking about driving toward town to see if her Subaru was in the ditch or something. Then I heard the growling of a four-wheeler. I looked out the window in time to see small, close-together headlights crawling up our driveway like some awful, bright-eyed winter insect approaching. Janine was riding on the back of Walker's machine, arms hugged around him as they plowed through the drifts. When he stopped at the foot of our porch stairs, she was laughing so hard about something, she slid off the rig and landed in the snow. More laughing. Not from me, mind you. She stood and dusted the snow off her pants. Walker smiled, gums shining beneath that skunk-striped mustache of his. He still had his trench coat on, still no hat. No sign of that big handgun now. I looked for that. He glanced up at me standing in the window, trained his squirrely eyes on me, gave me his gummy smile, and turned the machine back down the driveway. Janine stomped up the snowy stairs and into the house. She had stopped in to look in on old lady Grackley, she told me. Couldn't restart her car when she came out. Dead battery. Luckily, as she put it, Walker was there to give her a ride home on his four-wheeler. Why didn't you call? Well, her phone was dead too. Of course, neither Walker nor the old lady had a phone of any kind. The car battery, oh, well, whoa. Hold on a second, my story jumped on the screen here. 1 second, please. Sorry about that. I gotta get back to my story. Oh dear. I don't know what I hit. I hit some button and I'm hundreds of pages off here. I almost have it. Okay, at 6 it was fully dark. I heard the growling for so she came back. She'd stopped in to look at old lady Grackley, she told me. Couldn't restart her car. Dead battery, as she put it. Luckily, Walker was there to give her a ride home. Her phone was dead too. Neither Walker nor the old lady had a phone of any kind, of course. The car battery and the phone battery are both dead, I scoffed. You better check your vibrator. Ha, Janine said, and climbed out of her snowy boots. Some days are like that. Yes, I thought, more and more of them all the time. Thank God for Walker, I said, really pissed that while I was worried sick about her, she was out there riding around, pressed up against him on his four-wheeler. Janine gave me a look. Why don't you like Walker? I saw him walking in the ditch along the road today, I said, carrying a gun. I know, she said. He told me he saw you drive by. He was on his way to get his four-wheeler back from the Pakula kid. The Pakula kid, I said. Jesus, this just keeps getting better and better. That one's out of jail again? Rehab, she corrected me. I said, oh, how encouraging. Was anybody killed? It didn't come to that, Janine said, reaching for a piece of salami. Well, I'm glad it didn't come to that. I said, my head felt thick, like my brain was solidifying or something. Do you and Walker have long conversations about his low-life associates? Janine chewed her salami, took a glass out of the cupboard. She pulled the vodka out of the freezer and poured and let me wait for some kind of answer. She cut a lemon wedge, plopped it in, splashed some soda water on top. She tasted it. Will you go with me to Mrs. Grackley's tomorrow and jump the car tomorrow morning? Of course, I said, feeling morally exquisite. That is to say, the injured party, although I wasn't sure how I'd been injured. She picked up the snacks and her drink and stopped. You know, she said, it would have been nice if you had at least offered him a ride this morning or just asked if he was okay. It wouldn't hurt to be a little neighborly once in a while. She waited for a second to see if I was going to argue with that. How could I argue with that? She nodded to herself and went upstairs. I heard the bathtub running. For someone who was in love with the idea of roughing it in Alaska, Janine spends a hell of a lot of time in that bathtub. Plug your phone in, please, I shouted up the stairs after her. Thank you for reminding me, came back down. Believe me, anytime an evening starts out this politely, you know it's going to be one long bastard. Everybody knows that Chekhov said, if a gun appears in the first act of a play, a gun has to go off in the third act. I don't think he ever said it had to be the same gun. It has stopped snowing now. Walker is out there somewhere. I'm sure of it.
He's
And
reading.
I'm ready. This is my life here at Anchor Point.
He's
You want it?
a book he
Let me
wrote.
know. Thank you. That's it. So that story's called Chekhov's Rule. Chekhov's Rule. And that's one of the 12 stories. in the-
I didn't hear the last part of it because somebody was talking. Can you
Oh, yeah.
read the last paragraph?
Everybody knows that Chekhov said that if a gun appears in the first act of a play, a gun has to go off in the third act. I don't think he ever said it has to be the same gun. It has stopped snowing now. Walker is out there somewhere. I'm sure of it. And I'm ready. This is my life here at Anchor Point. You want it? Let me know.
I think I wasn't muted when you were talking.
Of course, that's the narrator. That's not me talking. This is somebody else. I don't actually own a gun.
Very good short story. I think you did capture Anchor Point.
Yeah, I said some things about Anchor Point in my novel too, and people get a kick out of them, but I'm probably not welcome there any longer. I don't know.
Oh, you never know. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for reading.
Oh, yeah. Well, thanks for inviting me to this.
It's a treat to be read to.
I'm sorry. What is, I'm hearing noise, but I don't know where it's coming from. Oh, never mind. Does anybody have any questions about the novel or anything? What did you guys talk about when you talked about the novel? Don't tell me you all hated it, and that'll kill me.
I am waiting for the sequel.
Who's talking? Where are we?
Darlene,
There we go.
I don't have my video on. I'm drinking my beer here, so I'm sort of isolating visually.
Darlene, okay. All right, there you are down here.
I'm waiting for your sequel on it, and I hope it happens sooner rather than later.
Well, I am working on it. Whenever I seem to do one of these things, usually the first question somebody asks is, did Cosmo D'Angelo live or die? Everybody wants to know if D'Angelo is coming back.
Yes, we want to know that. That's why we want a sequel.
We have a
We
big,
had an argument
big
about
argument
it on the
about- and
point.
I
of-
He was a fun character
haven't
to
read
write. Because of course he's very different than me. He's totally made up. I've never been a commando or anything, or the last time I fired a gun was probably duck hunting in the 1970s or something. So I'm not a killer like D'Angelo, but I'm not 6 feet 4 inches tall either, not even close. So and I've been married to the same woman for 40 years. So I certainly don't have D'Angelo's love life, that's for sure. But he was fun to write. It's one of the joys of writing fiction. You just get to be momentarily these other characters, like this guy who's this in that story that I just read, who's kind of a academic translator of poetry. I don't speak any other languages. I can barely speak English, and and so it's fun to take on those roles. Yeah. So I'm not. I can't tell you if D'Angelo lives or dies. You have to buy the next book to find that out.
Well, I'm thinking you could start a series like the Jack Reacher novels, because D'Angelo has some of those characteristics and they are quite good reading. And it was nice to have it set in Alaska. So I'll wait.
I saw one of those Jack Reacher movies recently. They made one. It was on TV not too long, or on Netflix or something.
The Jack Reacher movies are terrible compared to the book. They cast the wrong person as Reacher. And that brings up one of the questions that we were wondering about in our book group was somebody said if there was a movie set up, who would you select to play the parts?
Oh yeah, did you? I have my own favorite ideas. Like for Cosmo D'Angelo, there's about 4 really big, tall, dangerous guys that I like. First of all, I really like the idea of him being John Hamm from Mad Men. You know John Hamm? Anybody watch Mad Men, the series? He's really tall, and I saw him play a crazy bank robber, and I really like that. There's a guy named Liev Schreiber who plays what's it called? It's a name, somebody's name. I can't tell you. I had another one in mind too. Carl Urban. You know Carl Urban? Oh, these are all actors that I know from TV. I don't know who to say for Carla. I don't know the names of actresses as well. Someone in their late 30s. Who would that be? I don't know. Anybody have an idea? I don't know.
Would your wife like to be an actress?
No, no.
We
It's
were
funny.
thinking maybe Sandra Bullock, although she's not in her late 30s, but she could appear to be.
Yeah, they can do anything in Hollywood. That's true. I was thinking maybe even like Reese Witherspoon or something could be.
Oh, she's too sweet.
She's too sweet. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I've seen her play a floozy. I mean, a really rough character in a movie called Mud. Ever seen a movie called Mud? Matthew McConaughey. Oh man, that's a good one. She plays this crazy runaround woman, just like pool halls and stuff, and hooking up with guys. Yeah.
Rich, do you have other short stories you have written that you feel like you also want to make into novels? Was it rather rare to have one where you felt like the characters, it didn't go far enough?
Well, that's a good question because the next novel is based on another short story. It starts out with I can tell you this much about it. In fiction writing workshops, where I've spent a lot of the last 30 years, we often say it's kind of a facile, almost a joke, that there are really 2 stories. All stories are either one of 2 stories. Either the hero leaves home, that's one, or a stranger comes to town. That's the other form that they take. And it sounds mysterious, but if you think about the hero leaves home, those are easy to remember, like Huckleberry Finn has to leave home. Huck has to leave home, right? Go up the river. The Lord of the Rings, Frodo Baggins or Bilbo Baggins in The Hobbit has to leave home to go on an adventure. Even Don Quixote. I mean, some stories are like that where the hero leaves home and goes on an adventure. Other stories, the hero never leaves, but things happen to him and there are these changes, and that's what we call a stranger coming to town. So in my new novel that I'm working on, set in Homer, it's about a guy who's about 55 years old, in late 50s. And he's a single man. He's been divorced for many, many years. Owns a boatyard here in his town and living alone. And his 15-year-old granddaughter is coming to live with him because her mother can't handle her any longer. The father of the girl has died, and the mother can't deal with the girl who has some emotional problems and some drug abuse issues. And so this guy, he's 55 years old, and suddenly he's got a 15-year-old girl that is going to be in his care. And that talk about a stranger coming to town, that changes his life in a big way. If you like, I could read you just the first page or two of that story. And
Yeah.
it's a short story in my collection, my next collection. Let's see here. I got that. I should have that right here. Okay, I gotta find it. Oh, let's see. Let me go to the table of contents, see where it is. Oh, come on. And that is, oh, it's first one, first story. Okay. The story is called Extra Tough. Does everybody know what that is? Extra Tough are those brown boots with the cream colored label or rim on them that everyone in Homer is required to wear. You know, you're not allowed to vote or own property if you don't own a pair of Extra Toughs. You're in Homer. So the story is called Extra Tough. Phil McDermott is up on his roof examining the iridescent green moss smothering the shingles when his granddaughter Melanie comes home from her mindfulness seminar, upset and howling with uncontrollable laughter that bleeds into crying. This isn't a response to meditation Phil had been hoping for her. It is summer in coastal Alaska, maybe 40 degrees, clouds like wet cement, a persistent cool rain seeping through the big spruce trees surrounding the house. Not a day a man his age would choose to spend on a roof, but suddenly a 15-year-old girl lives with him, and Phil is taking his responsibilities seriously now. All of them. From up here, he can see Kachemak Bay, where a boxy white cruise ship appears in the layered mist like an invading troop transport. With the pandemic feeling more and more in the distant past, projections are that this is going to be a very big year for tourism in Homer. Across the bay, oblivious to economic forecasts and every other concern of men, glaciers chew through the stony mountains as they have for millennia, while Phil McDermott is reluctant to buy metal roofing that will outlive him by mere decades. Melanie pedals up the driveway on her bike, wearing her bright yellow Helly Hansen slicker. In spite of the cool rain, she is riding barefoot and laughing out loud, an ominous sign that she is slipping again. By the pitch of her hilarity, Phil has a feeling that this could be a bad one. Melanie, he shouts down to her from the roof. Startled, she chokes off her laughter and gapes up into the wet sky like she has just heard God beckoning from somewhere above the spruce tops. Her face, framed by the yellow rubber hood, is festooned with shiny piercings. Several strands of bright blue hair lay plastered to her forehead. Rain mingles with the tears on her cheeks. She finally sees Phil up on the roof and gasps. Gramps? She sniffles. What the fuck are you doing on the roof? What happened, honey? He says. She steps off the bike and yelps in pain from the sharp gravel under her bare feet. Someone stole my boots from the meditation room at the wellness center. Okay, he sighs. I'll be right down. So that's the opening scene. It always gets a laugh here in Homer because, you know, everybody meditates and does yoga, 6 different kinds of yoga and all that. And now I have like a girl whose boots are stolen from the wellness center. And you can see I'm a fan of irony. You know that already about me. You read my book. We'll see what happens there. I'll probably be run out of town after I get done with this one. Homer's fun to poke a little fun at. You know, it is.
Do you have the same editor and publisher for the book?
No, I
The one
don't.
coming out?
I don't know what I'm going to do. My agent quit the agency that I'm signed with, and so I have to, you know, when I finish the book, I have to send it to the agency. But then they're going to have to assign me a new agent, and so I don't know what'll happen after that. But this one, it's very different. This one is all from one point of view, just Phil McDermott. It's all about this guy and his problems, and his problems are complicated. He's had an affair. I can tell you a little bit about the story. That there's just so it is going to be kind of a crime novel again, like, like the thriller of sorts. He's had an affair with the wife of a guy who's kind of new to town, a guy named Nicky Calvati, who people think is in the witness protection program, that he's a mafia guy. So this is just, I mean, this guy, Phil, has got all kinds of problems. He's got a drug abusing, wild granddaughter. He's got a girlfriend who's his regular girlfriend is a principal of the high school. She's a real good character and a voice of reason. And then he's got this other woman that he had this affair with, and he thinks he's going to be killed by the mafia guy because of it. So all kinds of stuff happens. It's you're making me want to get back to work writing on it. I after a week in Mexico fishing, I have hard to get started again, but now you got me excited about it, so that's good. Good
I have
talking.
a question. This is Jean. I have a question about what has been the reaction of the people in Homer?
To the novel?
Yeah, and to your writing and stuff.
People in Homer, if everyone reacted like the people in Homer, I would be a millionaire. I mean, if the people across the country were as happy about it as the people in Homer, I think they're just happy to have a book written about this town. And it doesn't have a lot of the town in it. I mean, a little bit, but yeah, people like it. It's been very popular here. When it came out in the fall or late November of 21, my good friend Tom Kazaya, the writer Tom Kazaya, lives in Homer, also had a book coming out that called Cold Mountain Path. And Tom is a historian, so his book is nonfiction. It's about the town of McCarthy, where he has a cabin and he spent some time there, and he studied all about this town where there was a terrible murder in 1983. 6 people were shot down by a madman in this little town in the Wrangell Mountains. And so Tom's book and mine came out about the same time. So he and I did a couple of talks at the library here in Homer about writing about your hometown or writing about Alaska from 2 different standpoints. He's a historian and a newspaper guy, longtime journalist. So he adheres to the facts. Me, I make stuff up. So we talked about the difference in talking about Alaska from those two different methods. And we've had, lots of people show up for those. And we took it on the road. We took it up to Soldotna, that's a bright lights, big city. And we went up there and sort of like taking it to New York, like that. But so, the people of Homer have been very supportive. They like the book a lot. And everybody wants to know when the next one's coming in.
This is Joan. How does your wife like being mentioned in a story?
Well, she knows enough that it's nothing like her. The character in the story that I just read, the man's wife, Janine, is very different. And actually, she's not. My wife would help people with cats too. She would. But we have a cat of our own, and we've had as many as 4 at one time. And she's a former social worker, so yeah, she's kind of one of those helping type people.
I liked a lot of your descriptions of Homer area and the scenery and stuff. I thought it was very nice to read that and to share that with other people who aren't from Alaska.
Yeah, I got some emails and contact from people from outside in various places who said they really liked the idea, they wanted to come to Homer and so forth. I didn't, when I initially pitched the book or submitted the book to the publishers, I wasn't calling it Homer. I had made up a fictitious name. I think it was called Lost Bay or something. I was going to just fictionalize it. And the publisher kind of insisted that I name it Homer because according to the publisher, people all over the country like to read about real places and then look them up on the maps and find out where they are and then like that. And Homer is also pretty famous now because there's a reality show about the Kilchers. The Kilcher family here is on TV, reality TV or something. I've never seen it, but I know it's out there. And so people all over the country know about Homer. Plus, we're having a boom in tourism, way up, and home building. The town is going crazy. We're growing so fast. People want to live in Homer now, and a lot of people can because of working at home on these laptops like this here. So we've got all kinds of people buying houses in Homer who brought their jobs with them on their laps. It used to be, it was hard to move to Homer because there are very few jobs here. I only got to live here because my wife is a school counselor and got the job at the high school 20 years ago. Otherwise, it's, you can't afford to live in Homer unless you have two jobs. Yeah.
But like Jean was talking that it's getting hard that you have to have a lot of money now to buy property and stuff in Homer.
Oh, unbelievable. The prices for real estate. And a worse problem is you have to have a lot, even if you have a lot of money, there's no place to rent anymore for people who are working, not the less high paying jobs, people in particular restaurant workers. We've had restaurants that had to close or only be open 3 or 4 days a week because they can't get staff. They can't get waitresses, cooks, anyone, because there's nowhere to rent in this town now, because the people who do have apartments or rentals rent them to tourists on a day by the day. They don't want it rented to you for 6 months or a year. They'd rather rent it to somebody for 3 nights because they can get $200 or $300 a night instead of $1,000 a month. You can make $10,000 a month or more. So the short-term rentals are killing the long-term rentals and making it very difficult for making a terrible labor shortage here in town. Every store, every restaurant has help wanted signs out, and I mean, people want to work, but they can't live here. And this is a problem in tourist towns all over the country, like Vail, Colorado, or Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where they're fancy ski resorts. The workers have to live in another town nearby, but there is no town nearby. The next closest place is Anchor Point, and there's like no apartments there. So, yeah, it's a real issue. Our city is trying to do something about it. Our chamber, our city council. We'll see. Excuse me. I don't know if there's any other questions.
Yeah, this is Ron Yarnell. I had a couple questions. One, I decided not to ask because you sort of answered it, but then you started reading about your second novel here, and I thought, well, I'm going to ask the question again. Do you have any background with the CIA or those kind of agencies? So, and then the other thing was you talked about in fiction you can make all these things up, but one of the most powerful things I thought of the novel was your descriptions of the area and the town and Anchor Point and stuff like that. And it's very visual. And yeah, you're making things up, but I mean, there's still some of that there, and I think that's what makes for a real good novel, is where you believe it. I mean, you really believe.
It's convincing. Yeah. Well, that's the I mean, that's the hope, that you make interesting action that you create. I mean, the whole plot was crazy, ridiculous stuff, but put it in a world that seems real to the reader. And so in that case, I did draw from what I know. They say, write what you know. And I've been here basically for 40 years off and on, and 20 years full time. And I spend a lot of time out there fishing. I have a friend with a boat. I think Sherry was saying something about the nautical stuff, or the ocean or the sea. And I don't know anything about that stuff. All of that comes from my friend who has a boat. I had to call him. He's a lifetime Navy guy. He was a Navy pilot in the Vietnam War, and then he captained ships, and he was a harbor pilot here for many, many decades in Homer. And so I had to call him about the wind direction, the tides, anything to do with, when I go out on the boat with him, he just tears his hair out because I'm such a landlubber. I make terrible knots, and he just goes, oh my God, and I'll say, well, I'm going up to the front of the boat, the bow of the boat, not the front of the boat, and so all the nautical stuff was researched by my friend Ed. The CIA stuff was interesting. I actually had to talk to a guy who was he's the older brother of a guy I know, who was in special ops, and he was in other stuff that he can't actually say, but I know he came out as a colonel, retired as a colonel from the Army, and he did stuff that he can't talk about. But he did tell me about the like the chain of command problems when you have a project going underway, like the war against drugs down there in Colombia. I think I used that in the novel. The DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, and the CIA are working to eradicate drugs, but they have to bring in military guys to protect them because it's a dangerous thing. There's shooting going on. So they bring in special ops guys. They bring in Navy SEALs. They bring in Marines. They bring in Green Berets. They bring in all these different guys. So now you've got 4, 5, or 6 different services working on the same battlefield, basically. Who's in charge? Who you taking orders from? This guy or that guy. He says it's really interesting stuff. So I learned a lot about those kinds of spooky military things from this guy. Obviously, I've never been a waitress or a divorced woman, so I had to, draw on women I've known over the years. Some to create Carla, which is a composite of many women. Well, I think we're running out of time, so I'm going to just wrap this up, if it's okay with Leslie.
This is Jean. I had a real quick question. Was that Ed Murphy that you're going out with, fishing with?
Yes, Ed Murphy. Yeah, he's my good friend. Yeah. Yep. And he is a longtime sailor. He knows all about the sea and boats.
Yeah, I know.
Yep. Leslie, are we running out of time?
We have about 7 more minutes, so enough for one more question if anyone has one more question for Rich.
I was glad to at least know what the story that had been printed before, because it says in the Hunger of Crows that part of it was in a short story. So I was glad to know what part of the whole novel came from that.
It was, yeah, that story just felt unfinished. In fact, it was Nancy Lord who said something to me about it one time after that book came out with that story. And it said she liked that story. And I said, that's odd, because I never felt, I hurried that one. It was in a rush. The publisher called me and he needed another story. And I didn't have any stories. But I didn't want to tell him that. So I said, oh, sure, I have a story. And he says, well, what's it about? And I go, oh, I don't know. It's about, and I look on the wall, there's a picture of my wife dip netting at China Poot. I says, oh, it's about a woman who's dip netting. And the guy's he's in Boston, the publisher. And he says, what's dip netting? So I explained dip netting. And he says, well, what's the story? I says, well, there's this woman and she's dip netting. And he says, yeah, well, what happens? I says, well, there's this guy and he has a boat and the guy meets the girl, like that. And the publisher says, okay, how soon can you get it to me? I said, oh, just needs polishing. I haven't written a word of this yet, right? I'm just making this up on the phone, talking to him. So now I hang up the phone. I go, oh, shoot. I said something else, but I said, now what am I going to do? I told him I'd have it next week. So I wrote the story really fast. And I did Carla's point of view and the Scott's point of view back and forth. There were only 2. And then it kind of ended. And Scott's on his boat drinking, and Carla sank her boat out in the middle of the bay. And the end. That's it. The end. And so I knew it was going to go in the book, but it never felt finished. So now I figure out what happened next. And the same thing with this book about the guy and his granddaughter. I knew that stuff was going to happen, but it's not all in that short story. It's the short story was in a magazine, several years ago. But again, it felt like it needed to go farther. So that's what I'm doing. Yeah. Crazy.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us, Rich. And and for anyone who may want to rewatch it, I'll be posting it to the YouTube channel here soon and sending you guys the link. And if you have any other questions for Rich, I'll make sure to put the link to his website there for you guys too, so you can get a hold of him. Okay.
If anyone wants just a direct email to me, Jean has it, but I can just tell you right offhand. It's RCHIA, which is like my first initial in the beginning of my name, and then it's a long one, Horizon Satellite, all one word, .com. And yeah, write me anytime. I love to talk about writing and reading and books and so forth. I'm teaching a class tomorrow here at the college on writing what we call micro memoirs. These are really short memoir pieces, nonfiction pieces, like 300 words, 500 words, like that. And they're a lot of fun. We got a big class, 12 people, and that's what I do. We talk about writing a lot. I just talk a lot, let's face it, My wife, when she married me, she was 34 years old, never been married. and her girlfriends are all married, you know, and they say, well, how come you're not getting married? She's like, I'm waiting to find a man who will talk to me. She says, and then I met Rich. Jesus, the man never shuts up. You know, careful what you wish for. So, yeah. Now we're still together 40 years later. So it may work out.
Thanks so much, Rich, for agreeing to do this. We've enjoyed your writing
Yeah.
and we love your humor too, and your writing too, because I read some of your short stories or essays. I think it was called, it was about fishing, A Liar's Code.
Liar's Code, yeah.
Yeah, those are pretty
the
silly.
humor-
That was fun.
That is fun. That was funny. So
All right. Well, thanks a lot. I really appreciate you supporting. You know, hearing from readers is great for writers. We do this alone in our rooms, and we don't know what's out there in the world. But to hear it from 6 or 10 people who've actually read the book, that's very exciting for a writer. So, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it.
Well,
Bye.
thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
thank
Thanks,
you.
Leslie, for helping, and Lynn, or what's it
Yes,
called?
yes.
Oh,
Right over here.
Yeah, Lynn, there you are. All right. See.
All right. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.